Hi everyone, it's Sam from Sitemate. In this video, we're going to take a look at setting up a frequency chart inside of Dashpivot. The frequency chart is useful for tracking the number of forms that your team has created over time. So a good example would be site inspections. You might want to know how many inspections are getting completed each week or each month because you've got some KPIs or some compliance requirements. You might want to plot how many inspections are being completed and then break that down by the person who's filling out those reports or the project where those are getting filled out. The frequency chart really helps to visualize this information. So we're going to take a look at an example today. We're going to look at some site observations and tracking those over time, and then we'll dive into the filters and how we can break that information down to give you a feel of what's possible with the frequency chart. But just bear in mind that you can set up a frequency chart for any type of template that you have set up in your Dashpivot account, whether it's daily reports, pre-starts, defects, incidents. You can set up a frequency chart for any of those. So just keep that in mind as we run through the example. So here we are in Dashpivot. You can see that we're looking at our observation workflow template. We have a couple of observation forms that have been filled out already. They're sitting in the different workflow columns. They have some information on them about what area and what function of the project they relate to. And this information is great for seeing, the status of those observations, but it doesn't really give us a feel for how often are these things actually getting recorded. If we go to the register view, we get a little bit closer. We can see for the date column, we can read the dates for when these forms were filled out on what days. But if you extrapolate this over time, over many weeks or months or quarters, it becomes very difficult to visualize what that looks like and identify any patterns or trends. So that's where the frequency chart comes in. And in this video, we're going to take a look at tracking these observation forms that we have using the frequency chart. So if we duck to the analytics section, we have a dashboard set up already for HSEQ, and we're going to add a frequency chart to this dashboard. So let's click on the dashboard. We don't have any charts set up just yet, so we have to click this green button, Add Chart. And it'll give us a few options, but we want to click this middle one here, the frequency chart. And once we select that, it prompts us to pick the source template. So here we're going to see a list of all of the templates that are being used in this project team. And we're going to take a look at observations specifically. But of course, you could pick any of the templates that you have set up. Once we make a selection, it's going to show us how many observations have been completed all time. So since we started recording our observations inside of Dashpivot, it's going to show us, in terms of the time frame that's displayed on the chart, it's going to show us all time. So from the very first observation to the most recent observation is going to be the period that's displayed. You can adjust this, so you could choose the current month or the last quarter, last year, that type of thing. You can adjust the x-axis period that is, or the time frame that is displayed. And you can also adjust the interval. So at the moment, you'll notice that there's a bar for each of the days, but we could change that to weekly. Our data set's quite small, so we only have a few weeks worth of data, but you can see it's now displayed per week. I'm going to change it back to daily just for the purposes of this video. And then we have the last section in the settings block where we can decide how we want to show this information. Do we want to show it as a bar chart, as we see here, or do we want to display it as a cumulative bar chart? Which is useful if you have some KPIs or some targets that you want to reach for number of inspections or number of observations per month. You could use that, and you can see over time what the total looks like. So there's a lot of different options sort of built into the analytics here. The last one is probably the most interesting, which is how we want to break down this data. So we can select, by default it's set to none, but we can select any of the pieces of metadata attached to our forms, such as who created the form, what column is it in, that type of thing. Or if we have some category fields or list fields built into our template, we can select those in this list as well, because it's a standardized way of collecting the information, and the analytics works perfect with those fields. So let's, as an example, let's select created by, and you'll notice that the chart is pretty much the same. The only difference is that we've now applied some colors to each of the bars, and this is telling us who created those forms. So we can see here we've got the blue ones for Chris, the yellow ones for Greg, and the orange ones for Emily, distributed over time. And that's just one way that we might want to break down the information. We could also break it down by workflow column, because as you'll remember, we had some forms in the first column, some in the second, some in the third. So we might want to express that if it's really important for us to know which observations have been closed out and be able to visualize that on a timescale. We might want to break that down. So let's break it down by workflow column. And here we can see the colors, what they represent has changed. So in blue we have identified, yellow we have closed, and orange we have in progress. And this is interesting because we can see that the first observation that we made has been identified, but it's not closed. So today it's the end of January, but if we look on our frequency chart, we can see that the observation, which is the oldest, hasn't been closed out. So that's interesting. That's something that we can, there's some insight that we can gain from looking at our frequency chart. So those are the different settings that we have. The last thing that we'll look at is the filtering. So down the bottom, we can apply some filters to constrain what information we want to see here. So similar to filtering in the register view, we can choose from some of the metadata on the form and any list fields that we have in the template as well. So we have created by and workflow step, which is metadata, and then we have location and type, which are specific fields that we have on our template. So let's take a look at created by. So maybe we only want to look at the observations that were recorded by Greg. And so now, instead of looking at all of our forms, if I just go back, instead of looking at all 7 of these forms, we're now only looking at the forms from Greg. So we're pretty much just plotting this data now in our chart. So that's what we see here. So we can see from these 2 days, we can see that there were 3 observations recorded by Greg, and we can see the status of them. So we can see 1 is closed, and then the other 2 have been identified, but are not in progress and are not closed just yet. So yeah, pretty handy to be able to visualize the data this way. You can apply as many filters as you want. So if we wanted to then filter by location, we could then go and pick what location we want to look for. So if we wanted to look at the observations recorded by just Greg in just one of these zones, we could do that, and it would only show us those values on this chart. So pretty handy to be able to see that. And it's for this reason, this filtering capability and this breakdown capability, that we strongly recommend anywhere on your forms that you can. When you're building your form template, try to use list fields as much as possible. So an example might be, instead of, if you're recording on that form, if you want to record some data about where that observation occurred or where that form was created, instead of having a text field for location, you should set up a list field with a drop-down menu for the different locations and have them listed there. Because later on, when you come into analytics, you'll then be able to break down with the different colors, you'll be able to break that down by the location. And the same applies for the type of type of form that's being filled out, any parties that were involved, the people, basically anywhere where there's going to be a standardized input onto your form, you'll want to use a list field just so that you can get this breakdown and filter functionality later on when you're setting up your charts. So a couple final things to note. You can change the name of the chart. So maybe we want to show here, we want to change this name to just observations in January. And we can update the name there. And with the frequency chart, you can actually set up the chart both at a project team level and also at a company level. If you do set up a chart at the company level, you've got additional filter and breakdown options. You could break it down by project or by project team, which isn't something that you have the ability to do at the team level. So I hope this video has been useful. The frequency chart is one of the most popular types of charts that we have. If you have any questions about it or have some feedback for us, feel free to get in touch via the live chat on our website. We've got some help articles on the website as well if you get stuck with anything. And so that concludes this video. I hope it's been helpful, and thanks for watching.